Hey guys, welcome back to Smart Simple Fit. Today, I've got a lecture for you on how to use calisthenics to get absolutely jacked and really strong at the same time. All right, let's jump right into it. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about basically how to build a foundation with calisthenics movements in a way that's very practical in order for you to accumulate tonnages, to stress your muscles out, to be consistent, to build your way up gradually to skills if you even want to specialize in that. Or maybe you'll go a little bit different of a route and do some weighted calisthenics, but either way, what I'm going to be explaining to you guys is the perspective of using these as tools in order to get the outcome that you want. They're very practical. These exercises look really cool. They're a lot of fun to train, and in many cases, they're accessible. You can do them in a variety of environments. You don't need a lot of fancy gym equipment to do calisthenics, so that's obviously a huge advantage. There's an accessibility due to the limited skill that's required to do some of these movements. Often they're very easy to recover from, and that makes them very desirable to include in your program, even if you don't want to be a purely calisthenics focused person, a calisthenics athlete, whatever you want to call yourself, right? More of a hybrid. You use this as an accessory or for certain parts of your body, right? Either way, I'm going to teach you how to actually implement these into a program in a way that makes the most sense. All right, let's begin. So we want to think about building a foundation with calisthenics. Obviously, we're referring to body weight movements where you move your body through space rather than moving like objects through space or pushing or pulling against a machine in order to provide resistance. So these are the alternative to doing things with free weights and machines. Some people make fun of calisthenics. You know, there's lots of memes about calisthenics that are, associated with it, whether it's CrossFit being a joke, people doing silly reps and things like that. Maybe it's just the meme of people in calisthenics skipping leg day and having tiny legs, things like that. It's easy to poke fun at the outliers or the worst of a crowd, but just because it's true in part doesn't mean it's true of the whole. So there are plenty of people in the, let's say, calisthenics community, broadly speaking, people who enjoy and practice these movements who are absolutely jacked, pretty much head to toe, okay? A lot of names could come to mind, but I won't exhaust you with the list. There's a lot of jacked dudes who do predominantly or exclusively calisthenics. But in order to build a foundation to take advantage of what these movements have to offer, we need to start with movement patterns. Movement patterns are key to resistance training. So when I'm talking about movement patterns, I'm typically referring to, at the very least, the 6 foundational movement patterns, which are broken down in compound movements. So there's the horizontal push and pull, the vertical push and pull, the squat, and the hip hinge movement pattern. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about why hip hinges are not really adequately stimulated by body weight exercises and why you will definitely want to consider adding some load, right? Maybe even picking up some basic equipment, a barbell, some plates, or you may consider a gym membership for the sake of being able to do loaded hip hinges. But for those other 5, you can get a lot out of calisthenic movements or weighted calisthenic movements. All right, so those 6 fundamental movement patterns represent categories that exercises fall into. For example, a push-up is going to fall into the horizontal push category, right? You're pushing out horizontally away from the body, whereas like a handstand push-up, that's obviously on the more advanced side, whereas push-ups are very accessible even to beginners. The handstand push-up is a vertical push, right? So you get the idea. We can go from there. These are going to allow you to attack a lot of muscles at once, and they're going to allow you to stimulate the body by challenging it in a way that's very significant, right? Early on as a beginner, push-ups are going to feel pretty heavy. It might not be too long before you can do 20 or 30 or even 40 pull-ups in one set, all out. But just because they start to get lighter pretty quick, those bodyweight push-ups, doesn't mean they're not valuable at all. A lot of people use push-ups and close variations to get really jacked without much weight by doing a lot of volume. One thing that's great about push-ups is when well managed for your wrists and rotator cuffs, things like that, they can be pretty easy to recover and they can be pretty well suited to frequency, perhaps in a way that's a bit better than a bench press. That's subjective, depends on how you execute those 2 things, but it can certainly be the case. So taking advantage of these movement patterns is really going to allow you to attack a ton of muscle, the biggest muscles in your body, and to consistently get better. But if we don't do isolations, you will, of course, end up with a spider physique. You don't want that. So we'll get to isolations later, but start fundamentally with movement patterns for those compound movements. You're going to want to gradually build your way up to harder variations, right? So a good example of this would be if you're too weak at the start to do a full push-up, right, with your legs extended, doing push-ups from your knees is perfectly valid, especially for the females in the audience or someone who's really heavy set. Okay, doing push-ups from your knees can be a great way to attack your chest, your deltoids, and your triceps. There's nothing girly about it if it's a challenge for you. If I were to do them, it's not much of a challenge for me. But that doesn't mean it's not a valid exercise for someone else. Another example of this would be the pull-up. So if you're not strong enough to do a pull-up or pull-ups for reps, whether that's 5, 8, 10, 12, 20, okay, if you're not strong enough, there's ways you can build up to that, and you should be sensible and not sacrifice, the quality of the feel of the movement and the technique. You should be trying to do pretty much the best quality reps that you can, despite your limitations, whether it's range of motion, leverages. Okay, if you're going to do kneeling push-ups, they better look good. They better not be sloppy. You better not just be bouncing your way in and out of half reps. And the same would apply to pull-up progressions. Some really basic ones would be a gravitron machine. Maybe there's other names for those types, but basically a machine in a gym where you're using the weight stack as like a counterbalance, where however much weight you put on the machine, on the stack, it's going to subtract that from you. So basically, if I put 50 pounds on, that means it's 50 pounds easier than doing a pull-up with my own body weight. This can be a really helpful tool, and a similar tool, one that you can absolutely have in your home gym rather than a big fancy expensive machine, you could have pull-up bands. These are designed to give you progressive resistance, right? You can go from the heaviest to the lightest. You can get a couple sets, start with your greens and purples and work your way down to your, yellows and reds, right? Depending on how many pounds of force those produce. They go around your feet or around your knees and around the top of a chin-up bar or a monkey bar, or even just the top of your squat rack if it's made to do pull-ups, right? So that can be really useful. You can subtract part of the resistance of your own body weight and build your way up to that harder variation, which in some cases is just the basic pull-up. Again, if you're not strong enough day one to do full pull-ups for reps, that's perfectly fine. There's no shame in it. Just build your way up sensibly, practically. If it takes weeks, that's fine. It may take months in some cases, but be consistent, persistent, okay? Be disciplined, show up, write down your workouts, okay? Don't get content with sloppy reps, and you'll get there. You'll get to your first pull-up. I promise you, with enough hard work and time, you will get to your first pull-up. Other tools, just quickly to mention, you can do pull-ups basically with like your feet on a chair, again, to subtract some of the resistance, right? It's taking some of the weight off. And another one would be to adjust a squat rack or a Smith machine to get the bar low to the ground. Start on your knees or sitting on your bum. On your knees is going to be a bit easier, and do pull-ups from your knees. This is going to allow you to pick a bar height where maybe you're not doing a full dead hang start position, but you're subtracting it and then just doing as much of a rep as you can, progressively making it larger. And once you can do basically what looks like a full pull-up rep, well, you're ready to do pull-ups. So those are just some good ways to build up to harder variations. Bodyweight squat, pretty accessible to a lot of people. If you're in a position where push-ups and pull-ups are hard, or hard enough that you can't complete them, right, competently, bodyweight squats are probably something you're still strong enough to do. So maybe at that stage, bodyweight squats are a challenge. But for a lot of people, bodyweight squats are not enough. So they're going to want to progress to harder things like feet up elevated, rear elevated lunges, aka Bulgarian split squats, something like that, maybe even pistol squats eventually. Those can be great ways to stimulate your legs, but because of the skill demands and maybe some joint fatigue concerns, right, stabilization, I would say those aren't maybe the best ones. So we'll get into it a little bit on the leg section, but you're probably going to want to do back squats. After all, it's a weighted calisthenic, right? A squat, if a squat's a calisthenic, then a back squat is just a weighted calisthenic, all right? All right, so with isolations, on the next note, with isolations, you want to make sure to include enough of them that you don't develop a spider physique. So what this refers to is when the torso muscles like the lats and the chest, and then the thigh muscles like the quads, hamstrings, and then the glutes, lower back, these are all really well developed. But then parts of the upper back, the traps, side delts and rear delts, the forearms, biceps, triceps, calves, they're very underdeveloped. So it creates sort of this big body, skinny limbs look, and it's rather gross. Credit goes to Natural Hypertrophy and Protein Man for these. By the way, Protein Man is going to make a special appearance at the end of the video. He's going to finish off with a few minutes segment talking about some ring lessons, some calisthenic tips, progressions, and he's going to leave a free program for you guys as well. So give a big thank you to him. Go check out his channel and subscribe. We'll get to that later. But anyways, back on track. So the spider physique, you just want to do enough isolations that you can really stimulate those muscles. This would, in my opinion, include side delts, rear delts, forearms, biceps, triceps, the traps, and the calves. Those are the most important. Obviously, there are parts of the upper back that the compounds may or may not work that well on their own. So maybe including some things like band pull-aparts, rear delt flies, variations like that. Those can be really good to stimulate the mid traps, maybe more so than certain rowing variations even. That depends. But either way, you want to make sure to work those smaller muscles so you don't just end up with developed pecs and lats and quads and stuff, which maybe that's not the biggest concern with calisthenics, the legs. But either way, you don't want skinny arms and skinny forearms and no traps, okay? So we'll want to make sure to include exercise to do that. Now, this goes into a note that we'll get on later, which is the hybrid. If you want a practical way to isolate, guys, don't be scared of doing dumbbell curls, dumbbell shrugs, barbell shrugs, okay? It's okay to have some weighted things in your program. I understand that from a cost perspective, maybe there's a philosophy that thinks that there's like a inherent, superiority, right? A master class, a master race of calisthenics. I respect that a lot, and I used to think more that way when I was younger. But even then, I still did a lot of machines and dumbbells in addition to calisthenics when I was in high school, even though I thought they were a lot of fun. So don't skimp out on isolations and don't use a lack of equipment as excuse. Now, you can use rings to do pelican curls and all kinds of awesome things and pec flies. And obviously, you can go into a deep stretch and get lots of calf raise volume, right? You can do calf raises every day, body weight, build up some big musculature that way. But either way, don't skip isolations just because they're a little bit more counterintuitive when doing calisthenics. And on that note, don't skip things you suck at. So that goes back to build up to harder variations. If you suck at pull-ups, don't skip them, right? Start increasing the volume. Start increasing the number of repetitions performed per session, right? Start to increase the range of motion if possible. Start to increase the frequency. If you suck at something, don't use that as an excuse not to do it. If you suck at pull-ups, bump up that frequency. The more you practice it, the more you're going to get better at it. It just makes sense, right? Obviously, there's a limit to how much you can recover from, but chances are you'll get better at it first before you overwork yourself. All right. And skill movements, they look super cool. What are we talking about? Well, things like front levers and back levers and a full planche or a tuck planche, an elevated V-sit, muscle ups, things like that. These look really, really cool, but they take often months and years of training. Sometimes people who are really good at them are kind of skinny, don't have big legs, they're shredded, right? So body weight's a factor. So there's certain sacrifices people make to be able to perform those movements year round, right? I'd say you probably should bulk even if you're a calisthenics instructor. Doesn't mean you won't be able to do skills, but obviously being a bit fluffier is going to make it a bit harder in some cases, depending on the movement. But either way, right? These skill movements can come later. Focus on the foundation first. You know what? Vanilla push-ups or vanilla deficit push-ups, vanilla pull-ups, and vanilla, chest to bar, like sternum pull-ups. These are super adequate movements to get totally frickin' jacked. You don't need to do a lot of complicated stuff to stimulate your muscles and make them grow. Yes, you can manipulate the leverages a bit and increase range of motion. Obviously, deficit variations are much, much more challenging in some cases, like a handstand push-up. You can go a lot deeper. It almost looks like an upside down overhead press when it's deficit if it's high enough, right? So There's ways you can make simple movements harder without making them, unilateral, like a one-arm push-up, where it definitely changes the mechanics of the movement and things like that, right? So focus on the foundation. If you want to branch out into skills, give it time, give it months, give it years. Don't rush into it, right? Don't be disappointed that you can do 12 pull-ups, but you can't do any one-arm pull-ups. That's perfectly fine, guys. Just keep going, stay the course, stay focused. And what matters most is overall consistency and progressions. So real quick, basic progressions for pull-ups could look like this. Let's say early on, first couple months of training, you're strong enough to handle 20 good quality pull-ups per session in a workout. What that would mean is maybe it's 3 sets, 4 sets, 5 sets. Either way, between those sets, regardless if it's RPE 8 or it's failure or whatever, okay, you do 20 really good pull-ups. And then beyond that, they're trash. Okay, so 20 really good pull-ups, that's what you do at the start. Next session, what you're going to want to do is add to that volume just a little bit. Even a couple reps goes a long way. If 20 is hard, 22 is a really solid jump. Maybe some people would feel confident doing 23 or 24 reps. If you're only able to handle like 8 to 12 good pull-ups per session at the start, well, try and do 9, try and do 10, try and do 11, 12, 13, right? Just push yourself to do as many quality reps as you can in that session. And, if you're doing it 2 or 3 times per week, that's probably really adequate at the start. And with enough intensity on weighted calisthenics, it's enough long-term as far as frequency is concerned. But yes, you can definitely dial up frequency for the body weight variation a lot long-term. But either way, progression scheme can be really basic. And then maybe, let's say, the next time you do it, it's a week from that first session. Now you're doing 25 pull-ups. Okay, you're feeling really good. It doesn't have to be a magic number, but 1 or 2 or 3 reps more is really good. So the next time you come back, you do 27 pull-ups, right? It won't be long before you're able to go from handling 20 quality pull-ups to be able to handle 30. That's 50% more. It might only take you 2 to 3 weeks to pull that off. Maybe less. It depends on you. Depends on your recovery, your calories, genetics, etc. But either way, try and do at least a rep or 2 extra per session for something like a pull-up. And if it's something like a push-up, it's going to be very similar, except you're going to be stronger. So maybe you go from handling 25 push-ups in a session to 28, then 31, then 35, then 36, then 40, then 42. You get the idea. But either way, that's a progression. And I like to think about the total reps, right? Steve Shaw might call this a rep goal system, but you don't even have to set a goal to it. You can just accumulate reps, right? So if you're tracking how many good quality reps, and by the way, have relatively strict standards in what your reps look like for the sake of consistency. There's no such thing, in my opinion, as a perfect rep, because it's going to look different for each person. What a really good rep is going to look like. It's going to be a bit different. But point is, if you accumulate those reps, it is objectively a progressive overload. And by definition, we need that in order to make gains. So that's what you're focused on. This way you don't get into a limited mindset of, oh, I only have 3 sets. Those are my only 3 opportunities to get more jacked. And if I can't handle more reps. No, guys, if you do 3 sets on session 1, right? And then on session 4, you're doing 4 sets for the sake of accumulating volume, that's going to work just fine. There's no hard and fast rules. Now, I would caution you to not get too carried away just throwing volume at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? You're not going to want to go from doing 20 to 40 the next session, and pull-ups that is. So just be reasonable and just thread that needle. Push the envelope gradually over time. The consistency and the progression is what matters most. As long as your technique is consistent, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're going to get more jacked. It's going to work. Your body has no choice but to get better, okay? So get to work. All right. Now on technique, just a couple notes. Sloppy is stupid. What am I talking about with sloppy reps? You know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those CrossFit pull-ups and sad excuses for handstand push-ups, perhaps. I'm talking about people who do push-ups and think they can just, they can just wiggle their arms and say, oh, I did 50 push-ups. And it's like, did you? Did you? Because if you actually went down and touched your chest to the floor and did like a half-second pause, I guarantee you that same person would get like between 20 and 30 or maybe like 34 pull-ups or push-ups, excuse me. And don't get me wrong, if you can do 34 really strict push-ups all the way down and up, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's not beginner strength by any means. You're not like this amazing athlete or whatever, but that's pretty good. But don't lie to yourself and, gradually make smaller and smaller push-ups just for saying, be like, yeah, I got 70 push-ups today, bro. Like, no, actually hold yourself accountable. Make your push-ups look visually appealing. An average person should be able to watch you work out and be like, wow, those were really good reps. Does it matter that they're not an expert? No. Guess what? Neither are you. And you think I am, but what makes you think I'm an expert? All right, you get the idea. Your reps, in order to be good quality, have to look good to the naked eye. If someone can walk up to your set and say, hey, those reps look kind of goofy. Are you sure you're doing a whole lot? Maybe you should question it, regardless of whether or not they have a PhD, okay? Controlled reps are what give you hypertrophy, right? Where you are actually in control of the motion. It's the same principle I would apply to working with free weights. You're doing bench press, you're doing a deadlift, doing overhead press, you're doing biceps curls. You need to be the one who's responsible for stabilizing and moving and letting down that weight. Okay, not letting momentum to do most of it, not letting the stretch reflex do a ton of the work, not relying on your spotter to do the work. You're the one who's doing the work, and therefore you're the one who's getting jacked. And you're going to end up doing reps, amounts of reps and weights that are actually appropriate for your body if you control the reps. And it could be as simple as 2-second eccentrics, maybe less, right? Maybe more in some cases. But point is, you need to have an eccentric phase. You can't just push up and then flop and then push up and then flop. While that will give you some growth, it's not a great long-term strategy nor habit, okay? So avoid those trash reps. Slowly cheating more over time is a very tempting trap, just to say you're stronger. But avoid it. It's a trap. That's not what's going to get you jacked. Doing honest, hard work is what's going to get you jacked. Now, that being said, a little cheat goes a long way. So going back to that point earlier about working up to harder variations, a little bit of kipping in your pull-ups, if it's a little bit, that could be just fine. But it could easily get out of hand. Same thing would apply to weighted pull-ups. I've seen some guys do 100-pound pull-ups for reps, 150, 175-pound pull-ups. That's very impressive. 135 for a couple reps. There's a little bit of kipping that's inescapable when you have that much weight between your legs. It shifts your center of gravity. It's kind of awkward, right, to do pull-ups and chin-ups with that much weight. So it makes sense, like a little slight kip to help get your chin up above the bar. That's fine. By the time you can do a 3-plate chin-up, you're pretty jacked. So I'm not going to give you a hard time if you have a little kip in your pull-ups. But overall, doing more strict reps than you do cheat reps, so to speak, is probably in your best interest. So a little goes a long way, but I really, truly mean a little. All right, now on to legs. Don't skip the legs. Having small legs looks stupid, all right? No one wants to see chicken legs in shorts, jeans, whatever, at the beach. Okay, no one wants to see chicken legs. It's just sad. The ladies don't want you to have chicken legs. Your bros don't want you to have chicken legs. When you look in the mirror, you don't want to have chicken legs. And don't use calisthenics skills as an excuse like, oh, if my legs get too big, I won't be able to do planche or front lever. Come on, man. Just call it progressive overload. All right, keep growing those legs. Get great big thighs. Get 25-inch thighs or 27, 29-inch thighs. Grow the legs. Okay, bodyweight squats are a warm-up. I don't care what anyone has to say. If you're not an absolute beginner, it's your first month or two of training, you really don't have any business calling bodyweight squats a hard workout. They're not. With enough volume and frequency, sure, if you do 5,000 of them a week, I guess so. But it'd be a little bit more efficient. Put a bar on your back, put 25 pounds on each side. Whoa, 95 pounds. How'd that get there? That's crazy, man. Chances are, if you push yourself to like 20 reps of bodyweight squats or 30, you're going to be like, wow, that was hard. I feel a burn. But if I add 45-pound bar to your back, you could do the same reps and it's going to burn just as much. The burn can often be deceiving and make you think that you're working harder than you actually are. This is especially the case on leg movements. So no more bodyweight squat coping. Guys, they're not going to cut it. I don't care how many pauses you do or slow eccentrics. Bodyweight squats ain't it, chief. So don't try and trade big legs for skills. Nope, that's not an excuse either. All right, and on hip hinges, on that point, right, that's one of the 6 major movement patterns. Well, you're going to need some load, whether that's a hip thrust, a good morning, a deadlift. These are all very, very practical things. So if one of your inspirations or motivations for doing calisthenics is that, you know, the space in your house, your parents' basement, your apartment, whatever it is very limited, and maybe your budget is also limited, you know, either or, and or both, right? So space and price, those are good reasons to focus on calisthenics. Guys, guess what? One Olympic barbell or 5 foot long 1 inch barbell that weighs 15 to 20 pounds, okay, that's not going to break the bank. You should be able to save up for that. Get a pair of 45s, get a pair of 25s, 10s, 5s, 2.5s. You can do a lot with a little, especially your first 6 months to a year of training. And if you're just focused on hypertrophy, well, you can do high bar ATG pause squats. You could do heel elevated squats, plat squats, you know, front squats with the heels elevated, SSB squats. You can do a lot of things that don't require you to do 1 rep maxes, powerlifting style, low bar, barely getting the hips to parallel, or you could squat above parallel for the sake of your lower back. But chances are, with a few weeks of practice, focusing on technique, getting your stance right, opening up the knees, flaring those feet out, a lot of people can handle squatting deeper than they think they can and handle more weight on the back squat than they think they can. I get it. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for everyone at first. Okay, so let me clarify this. When I first started back squats, they did not feel great. Now they feel supernatural. Supernatural. I'm a ghost now. No, but you get what I'm trying to say. They feel excellent. Okay, so having that bar on my neck used to feel like it was crushing me. Now it doesn't. What changed? Time and hard work. I stayed consistent, and now I can walk out from the rack with over 300 pounds, and I don't feel like I'm going to die anymore. I used to feel like if I tried to squat 225 for a couple reps, it was painful. I was like, oh, I need a squat pad. No, you don't need a squat pad, and you can't use a little bit of pain and discomfort as an excuse not to do hard things, right? It's like having little slight tweaks in your wrists on push-ups. Keep going. If it gets worse, try and modify your grip, right? Try and do things to alleviate it. Maybe manipulate volume, right? Same thing for back squats. You can do less volume and frequency than you might think you'd have to, okay? 2 to 6 sets a week of heavy back squats is enough to make gains. Is it enough to make the gains that you want? That's up to you. All right, now I would hierarchically rank squats better than Bulgarians and Bulgarians better than pistols because of the loading potential. You can load a back squat much heavier and much more stable, much safer than you can load the Bulgarians, and the same applies to pistol squats. Now that being said, these are all good movements, so don't scoff at them. Okay, a pistol squat is something that you can build up to relatively quickly if you're on the leaner side, okay, and your balance is pretty good. But maybe start with some assistance, something to hold on to a little bit on the way down to help you balance. But either way, the back squat or front squat. I love front squats. I actually like front squats more than I like back squats, guys. And I think they're a bit more accessible of a movement because of the lower back factor, especially heel elevated. But either way, they're essential, okay? Bulgarians, pistols, very good. Plyometrics, doing box jumps, jumping up and down, jump squats, weighted jump squats. These things are underrated. They're okay, they can be decent, but they're not excellent, okay? And they're not enough to be your entire program. So if you're gonna include plyos, do it maybe at the end of your workout, before your most technically demanding and your most intense exercises. That's my recommendation for your leg training. All right, moving on to the hybrid/weighted calisthenics. Now remember, other modalities, if you commit to them, are going to make you a more well-rounded person athletically, right? So there's nothing wrong with training some overhead press as something that helps you build up to handstand and deficit handstand push-ups. Now that being said, you can certainly use push-ups and pike push-ups and handstand push-ups against the wall with your friend helping you out, getting up there. You can certainly use these to build up to a handstand push-up, but at the same time, there's a huge carryover between barbell military press or seated, no back support, overhead press, right? Huge carryover between that and handstand push-ups. Same thing with push-ups to bench press. Huge carryover. Not one-to-one, of course not, right? Strength is specific, we know this. But even when you lack the specific strength gains, when you switch to the other modality, you quickly have an explosion of gains because you've been hypertrophying your muscles up a certain point where now you can unlock those gains neurologically and apply them to a new skill. And that's what happens when you switch up with a variety of modalities. So don't be deceived into thinking that a massive increase in strength and early on when you're switching modalities, don't be deceived by that, right? You know it's partly just the skill, the neurological component. But either way, just having these other modalities in your program, maybe it's biceps curls just for the sake of easy, accessible biceps volume. These are good things to do. There's nothing wrong with doing a bunch of push-ups and pull-ups and inverted rows and things like that, and then also doing some normal dumbbell exercises. It doesn't make you a worse person, okay? It shouldn't be like cheating on your philosophy. Okay, it's perfectly fine. And then on top of that, for the weighted calisthenics side, backpacks, some sort of weighted belt with like a chain or something. You can also use a strap from a duffel bag. I used to use that to hold as much as like, I think 60 or 70 pounds, most I ever did. But for reps, it was more like 45 pounds. Either way, that duffel bag strap held up well. So do at your own demise, right? Test it out carefully. Use 10, 25 pounds first. But a duffel bag strap with like carabiner hooks, if you can get that around your waist, if it's long enough, you can use that. And that's cheap. You probably have one or two in your house right now. So consider that. Backpacks can be a really good way to do weighted push-ups and pull-ups and things like that. Pistol squats, body weight squats with weight. But make sure it's secure. And if it's digging into your spine or your hip bones, make sure to put some cushion in there. Put a sweater, put some t-shirts in there. Put something in there that's going to build it up so that way it's not digging into your bony bits, right? And then actual lifting straps, deadlift straps, those are great for pull-ups, right? You can use those to limit how much your grip is getting overtaxed and things like golfer's elbow may develop. So using straps long-term can be very essential to your gains. Now that being said, if you just get more jacked forearms, I actually have pretty small forearms. I need to work on mine for sure. Look at Protein Man in a sec. He's got huge forearms. He puts me to shame. Guy looks like Popeye. He's jacked. He's absolutely jacked and stacked. But either way, straps can be really helpful. Now, if you get your forearms jacked enough, maybe it's not an issue, okay? So do pull-ups every day or every other day. See what happens. Be my guest. All right, a small weight collection leads to huge potential. I talked about it a little bit with the squat example. If you just get a couple 45s or even 2 to 4 to 6 25-pound plates, those might be quite a bit cheaper, right? Whether it's Olympic-sized or 1-inch hole, you can get a few of those and some 10s and some 5s, and you can do a lot with them. Okay, especially for loading some hip hinges, do some good mornings, do some Romanian deadlifts. Okay, you won't regret it. You won't regret doing these exercises. And same thing for weighted pull-ups. Once you can do like 10 to 15 good quality pull-ups, add 5 pounds, see what happens. If your rep quality and range of motion doesn't go down a lot and you can still do 6 or 7 or 8 really good reps, start building your way back up with a very similar progression scheme that you used originally, but keep in mind, progress is going to be slower and slower over time. That's the single most reason why programs are not reusable necessarily, maybe somewhat reusable. It's just because they don't account for the fact that your gains decrease. That's really the main reason why programs expire, by the way. All right, so avoid the mental and physical burnout. Okay, so the hybridization of your training, experimenting with other modalities, using weighted calisthenics, that's going to be great to avoid getting bored and sick of these movements. Those are perfectly valid ways to train with, perfectly valid reasons to train with variety. So for your sake, I'd say consider it, at least in the long term, after years of training, right? All right, so that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining. Now we're going to go on to a segment where Protein Man is going to go through some overall tips, talk about some ring exercises, and as well, he's put together a free program for you. So go give him some love and say thank you to him.
What's up guys, Protein Man here. Today I'm going to give you a couple of tips you need to try if you want to get the most out of your ring workouts. Rings for me are one of the best pieces of equipment you can get. They're cheap, they're convenient, they allow you to do a variety of compound movements and isolations in effective rep ranges, and they will definitely build a lot of muscle. In fact, I would say that for upper body at least, you don't need anything else but rings and you can get an optimally developed physique with just rings. But if you want to achieve that, you need to take into account a couple of guidelines. The first one being choose exercises that are low on the skill aspect but have decent or high strength demands. Push-ups, pull-ups, rows, dips, stuff like that. avoid movements like the muscle up, the Maltese, the iron cross, the front lever, because those movements not only are they, or planche push-ups too, not only are they unstable, which don't allow you to take them to failure, you also have to spend a lot of time doing regressions and doing assisted versions of those movements so you can learn and develop the skill of the movement itself. So you have to first spend a lot of time unlocking the movement. So then once you unlock it, you have a subpar movement that you will use to accumulate tonnage. So you wasted a lot of time that you could be using accumulating tonnage in high effort zones, so you could get more jacked. So basically that. Push-ups, pull-ups, rows, dips, any variation you can try, and you're going to see way better gains than just doing planche push-ups, for example, or iron cross, right? The second point is going to be that because rings don't have the drawbacks that the weightlifting movements have of being high load, right? Putting you in compromising positions, and some movements have the disadvantage, right, of generating a lot of fatigue, like deadlifts, right? Rings don't have that problem, so keeping that in mind, you have a lot of safe movements that are high stimulus to fatigue ratio, with a great range of motion, and with a lot of variety to prevent overuse. I would encourage you to take those movements every single set to failure, or if you want, you can go even beyond. Or you could apply advanced techniques for intensity like cluster sets, mechanical drop sets, partials, stuff like that. There's not going to be a risk like if you were doing, for example, not mechanical, but if you were doing drop sets with bench, for example, you would find a lot of issues, right? Because the board could fall on you, or you could have technique breakdown and tear a pec or injure your shoulder, right? With squats, it's the same thing. With deadlifts, you have the problem of generating too much fatigue, which is bad for hypertrophy purposes because you want to keep your training as stable as possible. And generating such high amounts of fatigue with a deadlift will cause you to have to auto-regulate or take time off, meaning less tonnage accumulation, right? So with that in mind, I would say that rings allow you to do some stuff that weightlifting can't offer you, right? And following from that point is back training. You would see barbell rows, for example, or deadlifts. A lot of people train their backs with those movements, T-bar rows, stuff like that. They usually train, right, their backs 1 to 2 times a week. And I'd say this is kind of suboptimal, I would say. I don't want to sound like an optimal guru, but I think that there are better ways of training your back. Once you start training with rings, you will realize that doing pull-ups and rows, that your back can take a lot more volume and a lot of sets taken to failure or beyond, way more than you thought, right? And that is because most movements that people do when they are training their back also tax the lower back, barbell rows, for example. So, of course, you could do chest-supported rows, seal rows, stuff like that, but rings, right, allow you to have a million different grips. You can have wide, medium, close. You can rotate from pronated to neutral to supinated and everything in between, right? You can do inverted rows with your feet on the ground, feet elevated or feet even more elevated. So you have a lot of variation. And on top of that, they don't tax the upper back, the lower back, sorry, and they have a high stimulus to fatigue ratio, which connecting all the dots brings you to the conclusion that you should be able to do a lot of volume with those movements. But because you want to minimize junk volume, you want to spread out that volume throughout the week. So my recommendations would be to train your backs, I would say 5 to 7 times a week, every day. And do between 12 to 25 sets for back, and doing a lot of rotations. Every single session, rotate the movements to prevent overuse because you have such a high frequency, right? Again, you can play around with rows and pull-ups. I like to do my pull-ups when I'm mostly recovered, right? And if I feel that my back is super taxed, I will just do bodyweight rows, right? If I feel recovered and I want to do a horizontal pull, I could do front lever pull-ups and stuff like that in a tucked position. That's a low skill movement, by the way. So train your back with high frequency. And for ending up with the last tip, and it's going to be for isolations, Rings are amazing for isolations because they provide a homogeneous or uniform strength curve, but at the same time they allow you to rotate to fit your anthropometry, and on top of that you have the chance of doing a mechanical drop set. By changing the leverages, you can adjust the movement to make it easier, right? So you could take a set of ring curls to failure, right? And once you fail on that movement, you take a couple of steps back, you adjust your leverages, right? You get away from the anchor point, making it easier, and you can crank out a couple of extra reps. You can also use the rest pause technique or rep goal sets, stuff like that. You could use advanced techniques on isolations, and I would highly encourage you. Either with rings or with cables or with whatever, this is a fact. Isolations do not cause a significant amount of fatigue. It's negligible, right? So taking a movement, an isolation movement beyond failure won't cause that much of a fatigue. It's not a deadlift. It's a fucking bicep curl. Okay. So for triceps, biceps, forearms, face pulls, any type of delt work, I would recommend take your muscles to failure and beyond. So yeah, those are the tips. Hope they prove useful and that you can employ them into your program, or at least keep them in mind. That way you're going to get jacked out of bodyweight training. I also want to thank Devin Bain Holmes for having me on his channel, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.